push segues, basically, and then also we talked a little bit about iPad replace segues, where you replace the entire detail view, which is kind of a weird segue. We're going to talk about some more kinds of segues that we can do as well. And maybe we'll get to MapKit next week or maybe the week after. Okay? All right, any questions before I dive into this monster demo? Okay, feel free to stop me. And a lot of times when I'm demo, I'm typing away, I'm not seeing you raise your hand, so feel free to shout out. So I'm going to create a new project here. And I'm going to do single view application, even though I'm going to use core data. And I told you that if you click on this one, you can see some generated core data code. I'm actually going to use the code that's generated here, but I put it off into a category of my application delegate so that you don't really need to look at it. I'll include it in the demo and you can see it. But for your homework, you're going to do your core data stuff using a document, UI managed document, and I'm not going to show that because I want you to kind of go through the process of trying to figure that out for yourself. So I'm just going to create our normal single view application like we usually do. I'm going to call it Photomania, and it's going to be a universal app, although I'm only going to do the iPhone version. I'm only going to do the bare bones of this application. What this application is going to do is it's going to query Flickr, the URL for recent georeference photo thing, the same thing we did for Shutterbug. And, but instead of just showing you the photos, it's going to show you the list of photographers who took those photos. And then, you know, after this demo, you could easily make it so if you click on a photographer, it shows you the photos by that photographer. Click on a photo, it uses the image view controller to show you an image. So that's kind of the application we're trying to build. We won't get all the way to building those other table views. We're just going to do this main table view, but that's what this is going to do. And the way it's going to do that, the way it's going to show those photographers is kind of a little different strategy than we saw with Shutterbug. I'm going to, in the background, basically of my application, be constantly querying Flickr every once in a while and getting more and more photos and then just throwing them into a core data database. Okay, just throwing them in there in the background. Meanwhile, I'm going to have table views that are going to be looking at that data, looking at the photographers, clicking on them, looking at the photos, and that's just going to always be updating automatically all the time. Okay, so that's the app that we're going to build. So there's some things to talk about here. How to build a core data database, how to hook it up to a table view with the fetch results controller, how to fetch things in the background. Okay, we're going to talk about all those things today if we have time. All right, so I'm going to call this Photomania. I'll put it in developer where I usually put things. Here it is. I'm going to dive right in with building my data model, my schema, as you would call it in the database world. This is a description of all the entities and all that stuff. We saw how to do this all on the slide, so I'm just going to kind of show you what it looks like live. So when I want to create a new schema, I do new file. Okay, so I'm going to do new file. I'm going to go up here to core data and pick this data model, not mapping model, data model right here. So click that. We can call it anything you want. I'm going to call this one the name of my app, Photomania. And it's asking where do you want to put it. And I'm going to put it at the top level here where all the rest of my stuff is. Here's my controller, delegate, and stuff like that. So I'll put this data modeling file there. And so it creates this data modeling file. Here it is. You can see it's empty. I have no entities or attributes or fetch properties or any of that business. So let's just start adding some. So I'm going to go down here to the bottom, add entity. Click that. It added one called entity. I'm going to double click and call it photo. So I need photo, and I display photographers too, so I better add photographer. Now, one thing that's really important when you make a schema is you want to put the entities and the attributes in there that support the kind of UI you're building. Okay, and that's really important for you to understand in your homework. Okay, this homework that I'm assigning you is pretty straightforward as long as you pick a good schema. If you pick the right entities and attributes in the database, it's really easy to just throw up tables of information. If you don't, if you have kind of the wrong schema or just too simplistic of a schema, you don't put in a couple of attributes that you need to make your UI work, it can be like, how do I get that information? So the schema is your slave. You get to make the schema however you think it's going to best support the application that you're building. Okay? So photo and photographer. What kind of attributes does a photo have? Well, let's see. Of course, it has its title, and it has a subtitle. That's that little description from Flickr. It has the URL of its image from Flickr. It probably has a URL of its thumbnail as well. In fact, we could even store the thumbnail data, which you're going to want to do in your homework, right in here. We can put the data in, not just the URLs. And also, importantly, photos have a unique identifier that comes from Flickr. Because when I get data from Flickr, I don't want to be, sometimes you query Flickr, you get the same photo again. And I don't want to be duplicating that in my core data database. So I'm going to look at that unique ID from Flickr and make those unique in my core data database as well. So I've added these, but I got to set their, you can see I have warning here, or an error, because I haven't set these. If I click on this, you'll see I must have a defined type. So we got to set a type for these. These all happen to be strings, all 4 of these. But you could imagine putting things like dates, like for your recents tab in your homework, you probably want to have some sort of last viewed date or something like that. That's perfectly reasonable to put in here. And numbers and all that stuff. So we'll just do that. Photographers are a little simpler. They just have a name. Okay, a photographer has a name. It's a string. That's about it. And remember I told you we could look at these entities graphically with this little button down here. Here it is right here. They're kind of smashed on top of each other, but I can pick them up and move them. And you can see that as I move one, it kind of moves, makes space, right? Keep them. And if I have relationships between them, it'll keep those relationships sensible as I move them around. So let's create a relationship. What is the relationship between a photo and photographer? As we saw in the slides, who took, basically. So I'm just control dragging. I'm holding down control right now and dragging from photo to photographer, and I have this new relationship created. And again, if I move these things around, this thing will stay with. So let's go ahead and give these relationships names. On the photo side, this is the who took relationship. And on the photographer side, this is the photos. And we can inspect this right here with this little guy right here, the inspector. And we can see all kinds of things about our particular properties. This is true for properties and also for relationships. And of course, we know that this is a too-many relationship, right? Because a photographer can have many photos. So we get this double arrow here. But it's only a 2-1 relationship here because a photo, only one guy took the photo. And so if you move these things around, it'll keep this all kind of looking okay. All right. So now we've kind of set up everything here that we need. This is a pretty simple application, so we don't need any more attributes. But in your application, you're going to have at least 1 or 2 more entities and some attributes on there and some more attributes on photo. I left you with some work to do. Okay, so now that we have this, we want to be able to access all this stuff in our Objective-C code using properties and normal class syntax. So we're going to do this thing we talked about, which is generating managed object subclasses. So I'm going to pick the classes that I want. I'm going to go here and say create NS managed object subclass for Photomania. And we'll do photo and photographer, both of them. And we click this, says where do you want them? I'll put those also at the top. I'm going to put everything at the top level here. And here I have my photo and photographer. And I can see that photo looks okay. It's got photographer who took, but photographer not so much, right? It's got NS managed object for remove photos object. This should really be photo star. So I'm just going to generate these things again. Okay? And really, it's too bad that it doesn't automatically do this 2-pass generation, but you end up doing it yourself. Get used to doing this generate because you're going to do it a lot. You're going to be constantly adding entities, changing attributes like that, and you're just going to constantly be regenerating these things. It's going to ask you to replace them, and so don't be uncomfortable about doing that regenerate. It's a common thing to want to do, and so now we're winning here. Okay? So we have these nice classes, and now we can use properties to access all of their attributes, right? Photo.title to get at the title, for example. But as I said before, we might want to add code. And I do want to add code to photo here. I want to add code to create a photo, okay, to make it so that I can insert a photo object into the database. And so I'm going to do that using categories. Remember, categories is that new Objective-C thing I was telling you about where we can add code to a class without subclassing it. So I'm going to add code to this photo class right here without subclassing photo. Okay, so I do that with file, new file, and instead of picking Objective-C class, I'm going to pick Objective-C category. And when I do, it's going to say, what class do you want to make a category on? I'm going to make a category on the class photo, and I'm going to call it Flickr because that's what this method that these methods that I'm going to add to photo are all kind of hooking Flickr up to the database. So Flickr seems like a good name for that category. And it wants to know where I'm going to put them here, same places everywhere as everything else. And so here's my .h and here's my .m, and it's asking me, what do you want to do here? So the method that I want to implement here is a method that essentially takes a Flickr dictionary and adds a photo object to the database and returns a pointer to it to me. Everyone understand what I'm going to do here? So I'm going to call this thing photo. Sure, I picked the same name so that I don't get sidetracked here. Photo with Flickr info. And this is going to be NS dictionary. Photo dictionary. And what else do I need besides that photo dictionary to create an object in the database? A hook to the database. Okay, I got to know which database you want me to add this photo to. So I also need in managed object context, NS managed object context. Okay, and that's all I need. Just the Flickr information and the context. That's the place you want me to create this photo, and I will. Okay. And I'm also going to have another one here because I know that I'm going to be downloading these Flickr photos in big bunches. Every time I call URL georeferenced photos or whatever it's called, I'm going to get a whole bunch of them, like 100 or 200 of them. So I'm going to have a bulk load one that I'm going to call load photos from Flickr array, NS array photos of Flickr NS dictionary into managed object context. Oops, NS managed object context. Okay, so that's just going to bulk. It's going to call this basically repeatedly, although that might not be the most efficient way to do that. We'll talk about that a little bit. So let me implement these two methods. Okay, this is the interface of my category. And so here's the implementation of my category. Now, I can do whatever I want to implement these, except I can't use any instance variables. So I can't have any properties that are here. So I have to implement them basically in terms of photo, if that makes sense that way. So this is going to return a photo. So I'm going to say photo equals nil. And down here, return photo. And in between, I got to go find this photo in the database or create it or whatever it may be. So let's start with asking the database, do you already have this photo? And so how am I going to ask the database if the photo is already there? And the answer is I'm going to try and fetch it. So I'm going to have a fetch request. And it's going to be a fetch request into the photo table, if you want to think about it, into photos. It's going to return photos, okay, because I'm trying to find this photo. And then the request needs a predicate. And what is the predicate? Which photo am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for the photo whose unique equals the same unique that is in this photo dictionary right here. So let's go get that. And as string star unique equals, and we're going to need our Flickr fetcher, import Flickr fetcher.h. So I'm going to grab Flickr fetcher.h from the thing we did before, which was Shutterbug. So here's Shutterbug, and here's Flickr fetcher. I'm just going to drag that whole thing right in here. All right, so now I have Flickr fetcher.h. And inside Flickr fetcher.h, we can get the photo's unique ID with this Flickr photo ID. Okay, so I'm going to go down here and say photo dictionary, Flickr photo ID. Now I might want to do value.